This podcast is brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International. To find out more, visit blackaby.org.
Welcome to the Richard Blackaby Leadership Podcast. My name is Sam, and I'm your host, and I'm joined by the one and only Dr. Richard Blackaby.
Good to see you again, Sam.
It's always a pleasure, Richard.
Beautiful day today.
I know. I'm feeling a little bit of a little hint of fall, maybe, you know. It's always September. Everyone starts, at least in the South here, everyone starts to think, fall is just around the corner, and no, it's still at least a month away.
Yeah.
September is no...
It's a teaser. It's like spring in Canada. It keeps pretending like it's coming.
Yeah. But no, still more heat to come. So, but all that aside, we have answering a listener question today, and just encourage you guys as you listen, if you have questions, anytime, just feel free to reach out. You can email us podcast@blackaby.org, and we love to answer questions and dialogue with our listeners. So feel free to do that. And
I got this question here. It said, how did you get a son-in-law who's so good looking, but the handwriting looks a lot like yours, so I'm not sure where it came from. But
I haven't the foggiest, but that's a very nice note you got there. You're so lucky to have such a good-looking son-in-law. Count your blessings, Richard. But other notes are also welcome. So this one comes from a listener, and he has just talked about, really has a question about this idea of a toxic workplace. He's even been accused that where he works has a toxic work environment, or even himself perhaps being somewhat toxic. And even so his question really is, what do you do with if you're in a toxic work environment, if you work for a toxic person, if maybe you've been accused of being a toxic leader, what can you do to correct that and overcome that, if anything?
Yeah, well,
is it hopeless?
Well, that idea of toxic has become a pretty popular word that gets used a lot at times. And toxic, basically means poisonous. And a good example of that might be exhaust fumes from a car. If you got your car running in a closed garage, if you keep breathing that air in, it'll kill you. And that's really the concept of a toxic work environment or culture, is that there's just poison in the air. And over time, if you're exposed to it for very long, it's going to kill morale, it's going to kill teamwork, it's going to destroy joy in working and so on, productivity, effectiveness, and can cause all kinds of emotional distress and burnout and all kinds of things like that. And so it is certainly a reality that some people do have to face. And when someone comes to you as the boss or the manager and says, I feel like we have a toxic work environment here that we have to work in, you do need to address that. And but it's there's a lot to it, and hopefully we can maybe unpack just some of the issues related to that. But an example of a toxic work environment, can sometimes be when you've got some people, and I would say sometimes it can just be one person that can turn an entire work environment sour. It's amazing what one negative, critical, conflict oriented kind of person can do to a culture. But for instance, there's some things like Marxism, for one thing. Let's say you're a Marxist, in the sense of Marxists by their very philosophy believes that there's conflict, that there's the conflict between the poor and the rich, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. And that the idea of Marxism has undergirded a lot of things today, such as Black Lives Matter, and just looking at race and saying there's just a continual conflict between the races, or there's a conflict between rich and poor. Sometimes it gets into feminism. It's just a constant warfare between females and males. Mm-hmm. And so if you've got someone in your your workplace who has an underlying approach to life that way, then a Marxist almost until you can pretty well wipe out the other group, you're going to just assume you just assume that it's normative for there to always be conflict.
Yeah.
And I've seen people like this that it's not even, for a lot of us, we as leaders, we just think, oh, there's a problem, well, let's fix it. But there are those who feel like, well, it's not really fixable, because if you're, say, a radical feminist and you feel like men are just always looking down on women and always trying to exploit them and always trying to take advantage of them, then in one sense, you almost can't do enough. You could hire the same number of women, but then a feminist might say, yeah, but there's more men in management, and so you put the same amount in there, and even if you did everything and everything was completely equal, they still might say, yeah, but in your heart, in your mind, you still look down on us, or I felt demeaned when you talked to me.
Yeah.
And everyone else might have said, well, he talked to you just like he talked to everybody else. But if you're predisposed to conflict, then it doesn't matter what happens, you're going to see conflict. You're going to see oppression. And so, if you have one or two people like that in your organization, that no matter what you do, it's still conflict. And same with racism. You could treat every race in your organization completely the same, and yet they might still say, yeah, but I felt put down by the way you spoke to me. You just assume that there has to be conflict. And so when you get some people like that who are always looking for any little slight, even if it's just, and how do you defend yourself about, well, I just felt like you were looking down on me, or I felt like the way you said that, I felt put down. Even if everyone else in the room saying, well, he didn't speak to you any differently than anyone else.
Yeah.
So you add a person like that, and you know what happens? It puts everyone on edge. And the problem with that is that you can never resolve it. You can never do enough. You can't fix the problem.
Right.
It's different if someone says, hey, I've noticed that you don't have as many women in management, but here's some women that are fully qualified and so on, and competent and able. And so you look at that and say, okay, yeah, I guess, statistically we are a little underrepresented there. Well, we'll fix that. We'll promote this person. We'll put this person in place, but it's one thing to just point out an issue and then resolve it. It's another thing that no matter what you do, it just continues to be there. And so there's different ways where that happens, but and so if you're in management and someone says, I feel like we have a toxic environment, one thing you want to do first is just verify that. Is that true? Do we have a toxic environment? And I would just say that, and I've had some of this experience where sometimes, it could be true. You may have a toxic environment, or certainly an unhealthy one. That might be stretching it to say it's poisonous, but you may have a culture that needs addressing.
Yeah.
But you also have to always, of course, evaluate the source as well. So if you've got just one person on your whole staff who feels like the culture is toxic, well, I would look at that closely, because I know some people that everywhere they go, they see trouble. They see unfairness. I remember when I was in college, there was a girl that was in my college group, and she'd been fired from like 7 or 8 companies in a row. And so when she would say, it just seems like everyone is, and she was a woman, and, so for her to say, well, people just put women down, or people are just biased toward men or against women, I'd say, well, that could have happened. I could see that being the case once or twice, but 8 times in a row, and there's other women working in all those companies that haven't been fired, but you have. I'm starting to think that perhaps really the issue is you, and instead of taking responsibility for your own actions, you're just blaming the environment. You're just saying it's just toxic here. So, but so the first thing you want to do is just look and see, is this widespread? Are there many people saying, that it is dysfunctional here? And
I think if you have a toxic environment, you may not have a lot of people who are willing to tell you that. I feel like,
Yeah.
Maybe a sign of a toxic environment is nobody talks about the toxic environment.
Yeah.
But if you've got people quitting and, maybe being cagey about the reason, then, that could be a sign that you've got some culture issues.
Yeah.
So what would
think
be
for
some
sure.
ways that people, that you can verify this accusation of toxicity?
And I think too, you need to, if you're the leader, you need to find out, is it me? I mean, am I the toxic source here? Is it whenever I'm in a meeting, there's conflict and people lose their tempers and storm out of the room? Or does this happen whether I'm in the meeting or not? Is this happening all over the company? If it's widespread, then it may be a culture thing. If it's just only when you're present, then I'd start to think, well, if I'm the common denominator, maybe it's me. So let me first figure this out. Is this happening kind of throughout the organization? And if so, then it's obviously bigger than me. Now, if you're the leader, you're ultimately responsible for the culture. So as a leader, you've got to still say, well, under my watch, this is happening. But you want to know, am I the cause of it, or do I as a leader need to address the cause? But you mentioned a good one. If you keep losing people, especially good people, they may not tell you why. They're just tired of the fighting. They're tired of the tension. They're tired of just the dysfunction of the staff that you lead. Then that's obviously a huge sign. I think morale is the same. If there's just a really low morale among everybody, I mean, because toxicity just sucks the morale out of people.
Yeah.
You're not enthusiastic about work or what you're doing if you just have to put up with a bunch of nonsense all the time. And success. I mean, how successful have you been in producing your product and growing your business? If there's just no success, or you might have lots of success, but you're burning people out like crazy. Sometimes that's what happens is people just get used and then tossed aside, and it's burning up and chewing up good staff people. And so for at least a time, it's still producing products, but it's wearing everybody out. Nobody wants to work there anymore. So, there's certain tests, kind of like going to a doctor's office, where you look in certain places, and you see if people are growing personally in the business. Are they developing, and are you producing better leaders and people that are content to work there, or are people kind of stagnating? Are they just putting in time?
Yeah.
Are there new ideas coming forth? Are people creatively saying, hey, we could maybe do this or do that? Or are people kind of hunkered down? Are they more just usually a good test is just pay close attention in a staff meeting, get the staff in the room together and see how they relate to one another. Are they all very defensive? Are they all just kind of comfortably nestled into their silos where they just protect their turf? And how freely do people share ideas? How freely do people share constructive criticism? It's very hard in a toxic environment to give and receive criticism. If something doesn't go right, does everybody blame everyone else, or do they take ownership? Are people encouraging one another when someone does fall short? Does the staff rally around each other and be positive, or is it just negative? And certainly, are staff coming up with solutions to the problem? Because every organization has problems, but in a toxic environment, it just seems like you never really resolve anything.
Everybody's avoiding everything and trying to just
and
not
it's just there.
Stir the pot at all.
It's just like the attitude's kind of like, it's not worth it, or I tried to address this, or I mentioned this one time and got shot down, so now I'm just going to just get my paycheck and just try to avoid getting on anyone's radar. And so there's lots of signs where it becomes very toxic. Certainly the way people treat each other, though, is always a good example. If people are kind, if you hear laughter in the hallways and people are enjoying coming to work, then obviously it can't be as toxic, perhaps, as you've been told. But if there's not a lot of laughter, people are leaving as quick as they can to get out of there and arriving late. There are certain signs, that become obvious. There's something not right here, and I could tell just leading a staff meeting, not necessarily that it was toxic, but just that there were some issues going on, and you can just tell by the banter around a boardroom table. Are people enjoying being together? Are they getting caught up? Are they upbeat? Or has the spirit gone down? And of course, as a leader, the quicker that you detect that, the sooner you can respond to it. And, so those are some of the signs that you can be watching for. Just kind of like going to the doctor, they're going to take your blood pressure and your pulse and your temperature, whatever. They're going to weigh you just to get a baseline. And so there are just certain things as a leader that you're always kind of keeping your eyes on to just see, because again, sometimes all it takes is just one person that enters into the staff and with a constant kind of negative bent to them and constantly looking at what's wrong, or just making some snarly comment that just puts everybody in the room on edge. It doesn't take much or many to begin to affect the culture, the morale of the whole organization.
Yeah. Well, like this, we've sort of looked at how to diagnose toxicity in the workplace, but let's take a break, and I think when we come back, we'll look at some solutions to that. This fall, Blackaby Ministries is hosting Spiritual Leadership Coaching Workshop. The in-person workshop is October 21st through the 23rd. To find out more and to register, visit blackabycoaching.org. Links will be in the show notes. So Richard, before the break, we looked at, how do you tell if your organization is toxic? If maybe there's been an accusation that, you're toxic, or you're leading a toxic organization or workplace. So what do we do if it is the case? We've checked the symptoms, we've seen the signs. Yes, there is toxicity, and what can be done? And even if you happen to be the culprit, what can someone do?
Yeah, certainly if you're the source of it, then there's a lot you can do.
Yeah.
But, a lot of times people will come into an organization and it was toxic when you got there, and now you've got to fix it. Or maybe you've just inadvertently, some staff have been added that are beginning to turn things negative, and you begin to notice, hey, there's something is amiss here in this organization.
Yeah.
And so, certainly, as we mentioned before the break, try to identify the source if you can. Sometimes it could be just a handful of people that are just gossiping, spreading all kinds of negativity through the place. And I found as a leader, some things we've often said. One is just leaders, if there's trouble, get on it right away.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've got to postpone a meeting, postpone your vacation, but get on this quickly, because this kind of stuff festers. Poison, left alone, say, well, I've got poison in my system, but I'm about to go on vacation. I'll wait for a couple of weeks and then I'll deal with the poison.
Yeah.
You deal with poison right away, and that becomes priority number one. And it's not that problems don't come on your watch, but good leaders get on it, and you sort of just let the word be out there. If I detect a problem, I will be like a hound dog, just tracking it down until I find the source and we deal with it. And so if you're the problem, I'll be knocking on your door, and we'll be having a face-to-face.
Yeah. And
I'll relentlessly stay with you until you change or we change you and replace you with someone else. But so I would meet with people. I'd get face-to-face. I'd ask questions. I'd be watching to see how responsive they are. I'm always looking for ringleaders. There's usually some. There's typically, there are followers, and then there are leaders, and a lot of the followers can get back in line if you sort of knock the poison off at the head. And so find out who it is that's doing that. There's some things you can do just to team build. Sometimes it's just, hey, what's happened is there's always a vacuum with leadership. If you're not leading, a vacuum develops, and sometimes you just need you. Maybe you've had to travel a lot. That's been my case. I've led organizations, but I've had to be away a lot and travel, and sometimes you just get so busy and gone and focused on other things that stuff just happens on your watch, and then you realize, okay, I need to really hunker down here for a bit and get things kind of straightened up here. And so that means maybe you need to just spend some time with people and just remind them of what the mission's about. Remind them that you care about them, that you want what's best for their work environment. Maybe do something fun. If you haven't heard any laughter on the staff for a while, maybe it's time to do something. I remember when I led a seminary for several years, we just had a retreat up at Banff in the Rocky Mountains over the weekend, and it was just meant to be fun. And I remember we had a couple of things that we did on some of those retreats that we laughed so hard. It was so funny that, you're just like wiping the tears from your eyes. But we'd had a busy year. We'd had to go through accreditation. We'd had a lot of changes we're doing and a lot of hard work. And I just realized there's just something very therapeutic about laughter. And so sometimes if in a toxic environment, there's typically not a lot of laughter. So, take time to do that. And I would just say that if you find a toxic individual, like if you find someone who's just always combative, every meeting, they're just looking for a fight. They never find solutions. They just find enemies. And they just feel like conflict is inevitable, that every staff meeting, every interview, they just assume that there has to be conflict. I'll just be honest with you, those people, unless they have a radical encounter with God, they're difficult to change. People who always blame others, they're always in the center of every conflict, but it's never their fault. It's never anything they did. That they're just innocent victims, but they've been victimized by every other person who works there. And you start to think, well, or you're just a person that is just looking for conflict, and you see it everywhere, and you're disturbing every staff person you relate to. Then I think sometimes you just have to do some radical surgery and just say, these kinds of people, unless they have to completely change their whole perspective in life, and not just be looking for conflict. And so that often just means that you just need to help them let them join the army or something where they can look for conflict and engage in battle, but not in my workplace, not here on my team. And you just have to be something of a shepherd to your organization and your people. And when wolves come in and they're just really just going to eat people up and cause turmoil, you just have to, your staff have got to know that you will look out for them, and you just will not allow them to be victimized. And
and I think that's so key, is that you show that you care more about the rest of the staff, about them being in a good place than not making conflict with this one difficult individual.
And there's, I know some people, sometimes you think that there'll be tears and anger and loud voices in a staff meeting, and they'll think, oh, we had a robust conversation today. Well, there's a difference between a robust discussion and just toxicity, where someone is just, offending everybody around in the room and being allowed to get away with it. And I think sometimes as a leader, you've got to call out stuff that's just not appropriate, and to say, hey, hold on, time out here. Like, we don't talk to each other that way. You can express an opinion. As soon as you start putting people down, saying things that just offend, getting ugly, you've got to be the policeman who steps in and says, this will not be tolerated. And you've just crossed the line there. And if you don't say that, then people start to feel unsafe. They start to feel like a lawless state of anarchy where, people can just run roughshod over other staff people, and the boss just lets it happen. If you don't feel safe, then you don't do good work, obviously, and morale goes down. And so one of the assignments, roles of a leader is help your people feel safe and secure. And we should probably say maybe you're not the manager. It's not. You're one of the employees, but you may feel like you work in a toxic environment, and that's difficult because it's challenging enough when you're the leader and you're trying to address it. But if you're on staff, certainly I think I would. I mean, again, it depends on where it's coming from. If it's coming from your boss, you're really in. That's a tough one, because and to be honest with you, if it's a toxic environment. You may really need to look for another place to work. To be honest with you, it's like breathing in poison every day. You're doing harm to yourself emotionally. Obviously, you want to trust in the Lord. The God can be a stronghold for you. He can grant you peace, but you're going to be spending a lot of energy just trying to keep your sanity, your walk with God, your sense of peace. And I would just say, money's not worth a toxic environment. There have been some famous stories like Exxon and places where they were having some numerical success, money success, but boy, they were chewing people up. And
at least success on paper.
Yeah, on paper. And in that environment, they had a kind of a standard rule where the bottom 10% of the performers were let go every year. So you always were in fear that if I drop down to the lower 10%, I'm gone. And you're looking at everybody and competing against them, and sitting around the table are all the people that may still be here next year when I get booted off the island. So, there you can have some companies that at least on the outside look highly successful, but it's just wearing people out to try to keep up, and so in an unhealthy way. And so. I think for people maybe who find themselves in that kind of situation, obviously turn to the Lord, ask Him for strength, for peace, but at the same time, living in a poisonous environment day after day is going to wear you down, and it's going to prevent you from perhaps the growth and the success you would have had in just an ordinary or healthy organization.
Yeah.
So. If you're in that place, and I've seen people that thought, well, I've only got 3 more years till I can retire, or I get this whatever benefit, or that I hate my job, but it just pays so well.
Life's too short to hate the thing you do for 40 hours a week.
And money, it's there's a lot more to quality of life than just the highest paying dollar. And I've known people that have done that. They left jobs where it was very wholesome and nurturing and encouraging, but they could make $1 an hour somewhere else, and so that was unhealthy, and they felt all kinds of backbiting and attacks, and so to say, if you're looking for a company, look for one that. Don't just look at the bottom line of how much they pay, but what's the culture like? Is there laughter in the cubicles? Are people enjoying working together? Are there smiles? Do people seem upbeat about their work? Or is everybody, just kind of have a thin layer of smiles and on the surface, but you just sense there's stuff going on here. There's a tension in the air.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been in places like that where you just if you're just dropping in, you can't necessarily put a finger on it, but you just have a sense, wow, there's all kinds of underlying messages and feelings going on here, and you just sense it's almost like a powder keg, and it's tough to work in a powder keg where it could go off at any moment, and I've known people who've been in those places. People have angry outbursts. They just kind of lose it, and you kind of never know when something like that's going to happen. And I've had friends who finally just said enough is enough. I've got to walk away from this. And so, to the person that submitted this question, he apparently is in some management role, and so do some careful analysis because sometimes when you're at the top, you can be oblivious to what's happening downstream a little bit, but dig deep and talk to people. Ask if only one person keeps telling you that it's toxic, then treat that with, start to think, well, if it's just this one person who keeps experiencing conflict, that might be a different issue. But
Yeah.
if I start having people saying, well, there is this or that happen, or just what you observe, a lot of temper, a lot of closed people that don't want to open up or share opinions, then realize don't let something stay that way. Don't just say, yeah, I just wish people would talk more. I would just wish that people got along better. As a leader, there are lots of things you can do to make it a better environment.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for this, and it's been very helpful, I think. And again, if you have questions as our listeners, definitely do email us, podcast@blackabee.org. And until next time.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, it really makes a difference if you leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. We always love hearing from our listeners, so email us at podcast@blackabee.org.